From the quiet banks of the Tigris and Euphrates, the story of Sumer unfolds like the gentle ripple of a river at dawn. Often celebrated as the cradle of civilization, Sumer is remembered for its towering ziggurats, the first written scripts, and its meticulously organized cities. Yet, beneath these familiar tales lies a subtle question that hums quietly beneath the surface of history. What if the brilliance of Sumer was not entirely original? What if these achievements were inherited, shaped by echoes of an older, forgotten civilization? This notion is both humbling and intriguing, suggesting that the story of humanity might be far deeper and stranger than our textbooks imply. In this exploration, we step softly into the realm where fact meets speculation, where archaeology brushes against myth, and where the familiar contours of history begin to blur. As night falls and attention drifts, we invite a meditative journey, a contemplation of the past that balances curiosity with reverence, weaving the known and the unknown into a seamless narrative. Sumer's cities, rulers, and innovations are luminous points of reference, yet they may only be part of a longer continuum, a chapter in a story that began far before written records first emerged. The idea of a forgotten race preceding Sumer is not entirely new, yet remains tantalizingly elusive. Across continents, hints of civilizations older than our recorded history occasionally appear. Submerged ruins beneath rising seas, megalithic structures whose alignments suggest advanced knowledge, and artifacts that seem to defy the timeline of human progress. These fragments whisper of a past that is largely invisible, surviving only in the faint echoes carried by the soil, the stones, and the myths of later peoples. If Sumer inherited even a fraction of this knowledge, its accomplishments could be seen as part of a continuous thread, stretching far beyond the first cities and early kings. To imagine such a lineage is to enter a space between history and speculation, where questions linger and certainty recedes. It is a gentle space for reflection, ideal for the quiet hours, when the mind can wander across centuries, sensing patterns, connections, and possibilities that remain invisible to the day-lit eye. As we continue this journey, we balance the luminous clarity of Sumer's records with the soft shadows of what came before, allowing the mystery to unfold gradually, layer by layer, like a river revealing hidden tributaries beneath its calm surface. Before Sumer rose from the fertile plains of Mesopotamia, there existed spaces in human history shrouded in uncertainty, fragments of time that resist easy reconstruction. These are the shadows that lie before the first recorded civilizations, the gaps between what we know and what may have been. Archaeology often presents a linear narrative, leading from primitive settlements to organized cities, but scattered across the globe are hints of achievements, structures, and artifacts that do not fit neatly into this progression. These anomalies suggest that Sumer, impressive as it was, might have inherited knowledge from a deeper, older source, a civilization that existed and vanished long before the first clay tablets were inscribed. Across continents, archaeologists and historians have uncovered ruins and structures whose precision and scale challenge conventional understanding. In the deserts of Arabia, stone circles and megaliths predate many known civilizations, their purpose and construction still uncertain. In South America, vast terraces and stone walls rise in patterns so precise that some researchers have marveled at the engineering knowledge they imply. Even in Europe, megalithic sites, aligned with celestial events, hint at an awareness of astronomy and mathematics that seems advanced for the periods in which they were built. These remnants, silent yet persistent, suggest a continuity of human ingenuity that predates Sumer, leaving us to wonder who first walked the earth with such understanding. Some of the most compelling evidence comes from sites whose origins remain enigmatic. Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, for instance, is a vast ceremonial complex dating back more than 11,000 years, centuries before the rise of Sumer. Massive stone pillars, carved with animals and abstract symbols, stand arranged in precise circles, suggesting sophisticated planning, artistic ability, and ritualistic purpose. The sheer scale of the site, combined with its early date, raises profound questions. How were such stones moved and arranged with the tools of the time? What knowledge guided the hands that shaped them? And perhaps most intriguingly, why was this knowledge seemingly forgotten for thousands of years, only to re-emerge in the civilizations that followed? Similarly, submerged ruins and underwater structures in various parts of the world offer tantalizing glimpses of human activity long obscured by the sea. In locations such as the coastlines of India and Japan, archaeologists have identified foundations, walls, and geometric formations that suggest entire settlements existed and were later lost to rising waters. These discoveries hint at civilizations that may have flourished in ways now largely invisible to us, civilizations that could have passed down ideas, techniques, and myths that later influenced societies like Sumer. The echoes of these early peoples, though faint, resonate through the artifacts, suggesting a depth of history richer than the surviving records alone can convey. Artifacts themselves sometimes appear startlingly advanced for their purported time. Tools of unknown material composition, objects whose function is debated, and symbolic carvings that defy simple explanation all contribute to the sense that humanity's past may be layered and complex. Some of these items suggest knowledge of astronomy, geometry, or engineering that seems to predate recorded discovery, implying the existence of a culture that mastered concepts lost to later generations. Each find, however fragmentary, is a whisper from the shadows, a hint that the story of human progress is not linear, but cyclical, punctuated by rises, collapses, and forgotten legacies. Even the fossil record offers subtle clues to the possibility of a pre-Sumerian influence. Ancient hominins, whose remains have been discovered in Africa, Asia, and Europe, display variations in anatomy and culture that challenge simplistic evolutionary narratives. Some skeletal remains suggest interactions between different groups, exchanges of tools, or perhaps even shared knowledge that predates the historical record. When considered alongside the anomalies in architecture and artifacts, these discoveries paint a picture of a past rich with diversity, interaction, and perhaps civilizations whose memory was partially erased by the passage of millennia. The myths and oral traditions preserved across cultures also point to these shadows before Sumer. Stories of lost cities, sunken lands, and advanced peoples appear in countless regions, often separated by vast distances and centuries. Atlantis, Lemuria, and similar legends tell of societies that flourished long ago, possessing knowledge and technologies that would later resurface in civilizations such as Sumer. While scholars may dismiss these tales as purely symbolic, the recurrence of similar themes across unrelated cultures is striking. Perhaps these stories are faint echoes of memories preserved through generations, traces of a human awareness that the rise of Sumer was not the absolute beginning. Yet the mystery is not only in what has been discovered, but also in what has been lost. Time, climate, and geological change have erased countless traces of early human activity. Floods, shifting riverbeds, and rising seas may have swallowed settlements entirely, leaving only fragments for modern eyes to discern. The apparent gaps in human history are thus as much a product of natural forces as of human forgetfulness. These absences invite speculation. If civilizations existed before Sumer, what knowledge, traditions, and wisdom might have been transmitted, even partially, to the societies that emerge from their shadows? How much of what we consider original may, in fact, be inherited, a continuation of endeavors begun by those whose names we will never know? In considering the evidence, one cannot ignore the patterns that suggest intentionality and planning. Whether in the alignment of megaliths, the layout of early cities, or the symbolic carvings that survive in remote sites, there is a sense of deliberate order. These patterns imply a guiding intelligence, an awareness of principles that extend beyond mere survival. It is in these patterns that the possibility of a forgotten race becomes tangible, not as a fanciful myth, but as a subtle presence in the archaeology a whispering influence that may have shaped the very foundations upon which Sumer would later flourish. Exploring the shadows before Sumer also encourages a shift in perspective, asking us to see history not as a straight line, but as a complex web. Civilization does not always emerge from simplicity to complexity in a predictable fashion. Sometimes, knowledge rises and falls, is preserved or lost, only to reappear in unexpected forms. The Sumerians, remarkable as they were, may have stood upon the shoulders of earlier innovators, inheriting techniques, symbols, and ideas from a distant past. By studying the fragments, anomalies, and whispers of prehistory, we begin to imagine a human journey that stretches far beyond the conventional cradle of civilization, a journey marked by ingenuity, loss, and the enduring mystery of what truly came before. As we peer into these ancient shadows, a sense of wonder emerges alongside the questions. What civilizations vanished before their stories could be written? What knowledge was preserved only in fleeting monuments, myths, and artifacts? And how might this hidden heritage have shaped the trajectory of humanity, culminating in the rise of Sumer and beyond? By lingering in these uncertainties, we cultivate not only curiosity, but also humility, a recognition that the history we know is only a portion of a much grander, richer tapestry. It is in these shadows that we find the seeds of possibility, the delicate threads that connect the known past with the mysterious worlds that existed long before the first cities of Mesopotamia emerged from the fertile soil. Across the world, in lands separated by oceans, mountains, and deserts, stories of extraordinary beings and ancient civilizations emerge with remarkable consistency. These myths, passed down through countless generations, hint at memories older than the written record, echoes of a time when the world may have been very different from the one we think we know. In Sumer, the Anunnaki were said to descend from the heavens, teaching humans the arts of agriculture, law, and city building. Far to the east, in the highlands of India, texts speak of the Devas and Asuras, divine and semi-divine beings engaged in cosmic struggles that shaped the world. Across the Mediterranean, the Titans of Greece loom as primordial giants, holding sway over the earth before the age of humankind. And in the Americas, legends of sky people and ancestral giants permeate the oral traditions of the Maya, Aztec, and Inca civilizations. These stories, though varied in their details, share an unsettling similarity. They describe beings, knowledge, and events that predate known human history. The recurring motifs across these cultures suggest more than coincidence. In myth after myth, we find echoes of a civilization or a race whose capabilities surpassed the ordinary, whose wisdom and skills laid the groundwork for human advancement. These tales are not uniform. They shift and transform across time and geography. But at their core lies a pattern, a subtle suggestion that the origins of humanity may be entangled with something older and largely forgotten. The contrast is striking. On one hand, the historical record gives us the Sumerians, with their cities, their writing, and their technology. On the other hand, myth whispers of earlier beings whose existence we can neither fully confirm nor completely dismiss. In Mesopotamia itself, the stories of the Anunnaki provide a particularly vivid illustration of this tension. These deities were said to govern humanity, providing knowledge and instruction, shaping the growth of society itself. They were both revered and feared, seen as intermediaries between the human and the divine. Yet their influence was palpable, embedded in the myths, rituals, and laws that structured Sumerian life. Modern interpretations vary, some viewing these tales as allegorical, others as the distant memory of contact with an advanced race. Regardless of interpretation, these myths suggest that the Sumerians recognized a heritage not entirely their own, that their achievements may have been influenced by forces reaching beyond their immediate experience. Similarly, in the traditions of the Americas, stories of giants and sky people hint at a knowledge that seems to arrive fully formed. The legends describe beings who built great cities, taught agriculture, and passed down sacred knowledge before fading from the earth. In some accounts, these beings were not entirely human, possessing abilities or wisdom that seemed extraordinary. Like the Anunnaki, they were both creators and guides, leaving behind a legacy that humans would inherit, interpret, and continue. The pattern is compelling. Across continents and cultures, there is a persistent awareness of something preceding the rise of civilization as we know it. The myths of ancient Greece and Rome also suggest a world shaped by predecessors. The Titans, often depicted as colossal beings, existed before the Olympian gods, ruling the earth in ways that foreshadowed human governance and societal order. These stories, layered with allegory and symbolic meaning, may encode memories of an earlier epoch when beings of immense capability influenced the course of human development. Similarly, Egyptian myths speak of gods who brought knowledge of agriculture, writing, and architecture to humanity, shaping the civilization along paths that would endure for millennia. Across these examples, we see a remarkable pattern. Human cultures repeatedly imagine or remember a precursor, a teacher, or a progenitor whose knowledge set the stage for later achievement. The consistency of these motifs invites reflection on the nature of memory itself. Myths are not literal history, yet they preserve truths of another kind. The cultural and psychological truths of a people attempting to explain their origins, their environment, and the mysteries of existence. In some cases, these myths may encode genuine memories of events, peoples, or knowledge that existed long before written records were possible. The repetition of similar stories across cultures separated by vast distances raises the tantalizing possibility that humans retained fragments of a collective awareness, hints of a forgotten race whose influence persists even in the absence of concrete archaeological evidence. These myths also highlight the contrast between what is documented and what is intangible, between the visible achievements of civilizations like Sumer and the hidden threads woven through story and legend. While clay tablets and monumental architecture speak of organized, recorded history, myths preserve what is unrecorded, ephemeral, and often dismissed. Yet in these ephemeral stories, there's a sense of continuity, a bridge from the past that reaches forward into the civilizations that followed. They suggest that humanity's beginnings may not be entirely traceable through material evidence alone, that the foundations of culture, technology, and social order may have been laid by beings whose memory survives only in narrative form. Furthermore, these myths challenge our assumptions about linear progress. They imply that knowledge and culture may have existed in advanced forms before the rise of recorded civilizations, only to be partially lost, fragmented, or transformed over time. Humanity's story may not begin with Sumer, but rather with earlier peoples whose achievements were extraordinary for their time and whose legacies were inherited, consciously or unconsciously, by subsequent societies. The pattern is subtle but persistent. Civilizations arise, build, and sometimes vanish, leaving only echoes in the myths, artifacts, and unexplained structures that survive. By listening carefully to these stories, one can sense the faint contours of a pre-Sumerian world, glimpsing the possibility of a race whose knowledge and culture preceded what we traditionally consider the beginning of civilization. Myths, far from being idle tales, become a lens through which we can explore the invisible threads that link humanity to a past that is both known and unknown. They allow us to see the contrast between the concrete and the speculative, the factual and the mysterious. And in doing so, they cultivate a sense of wonder that is both gentle and profound, perfectly suited for contemplation. In reflecting on these global echoes, one begins to understand that the origins of humanity may be more complex than any single narrative allows. The myths, the stories, and the legends of the world may carry the faint imprint of earlier societies, of beings whose influence shaped the rise of civilizations such as Sumer. These echoes remind us that history is not only the story of what was recorded in stone and clay, but also the story of what has been remembered in the human imagination, preserved in whispers, songs, and allegories passed from generation to generation. As we linger in these ancient tales, a sense of awe arises, not for the myths themselves, but for the possibility they hint at, that humanity may have inherited more than we realize, that the brilliance of early civilizations like Sumer may rest upon foundations older than we can yet fully trace. By following the threads of myth across continents and cultures, we begin to glimpse a world in which the known and unknown coexist, where history and imagination intertwine, and where the legacy of a forgotten race may still resonate in the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and where we came from. As we move further into the mysteries that surround the origins of civilization, we encounter the astonishing technologies and knowledge that appear unexpectedly in the archaeological record. These are the tools, constructions, and innovations that seem almost too advanced for the times in which they were created, leaving historians, engineers, and curious observers alike to wonder how they were achieved. The Sumerians themselves were undeniably skilled, mastering irrigation, metallurgy, and city planning with impressive sophistication. Yet when we examine the evidence more closely, there are glimpses of knowledge that appear to transcend the limits of the known timeline, hinting at the possibility that some of humanity's earliest innovations were inherited from a deeper, forgotten source. Take, for instance, the construction of massive stone structures scattered across the globe. From the precise, interlocking stonework of South America's Machu Picchu to the colossal megaliths of Baalbek in Lebanon. These feats challenge our understanding of ancient engineering. The stones, some weighing hundreds of tons, were cut and positioned with a precision that seems almost impossible without advanced tools or knowledge of mathematics and physics. In many cases, no clear evidence exists to explain how these enormous blocks were transported, lifted, or fitted together so flawlessly. Such structures raise a quiet but persistent question. Did the civilizations that created them innovate entirely on their own, or were they building upon techniques passed down from an older, forgotten people whose understanding of the world was far greater than we imagine? Even more enigmatic are artifacts whose purpose or sophistication defies easy categorization. Tools made from materials not common to the region, objects with precision carvings, and mechanisms that hint at an understanding of mechanics suggest knowledge that may have been transmitted rather than invented in isolation. Some artifacts, for example, display intricate geometry, advanced metallurgy, or subtle astronomical alignments. The implications are subtle but profound. There may have existed a lineage of knowledge, a continuity of intellectual achievement that stretches beyond the reach of our historical records. These discoveries do not merely surprise. They whisper of a hidden history, a shadow civilization whose influence endures in fragments across time and space. The field of ancient astronomy provides another window into this hidden legacy. Long before modern instruments, certain civilizations were able to track celestial movements with extraordinary accuracy. Sumerians charted the positions of planets and stars, anticipating astronomical events with a level of precision that seems improbable for their era. Similar knowledge appears in other early societies. The alignment of pyramids in Egypt, the orientation of stone circles in Britain, and the astronomical carvings of the Maya in Central America all demonstrate a sophisticated understanding of the cosmos. When these findings are considered together, they suggest that the awareness of celestial patterns may not have arisen independently in each culture. Perhaps this knowledge was inherited, passed down through generations from a civilization whose memory has largely faded, but whose influence still echoes in the structures and calendars of the societies that followed. Even in the realm of art and symbolism, we find evidence of advanced understanding. Intricate carvings, symbolic representations, and patterns found in the earliest human creations reveal a mind capable of abstract thought, planning, and communication far beyond basic survival. Some symbols and motifs appear across different continents, separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time. The repetition of these forms hints at a shared knowledge, a cultural thread linking distant societies and suggesting the influence of a civilization older than Sumer. In this sense, art itself becomes a vessel for inherited knowledge, carrying lessons, observations, and concepts that may have originated with people long forgotten. Engineering feats, particularly in water management, further illustrate the depth of early knowledge. The Sumerians built extensive canal networks to channel water from rivers into their fields, supporting agriculture and sustaining urban populations. Yet in other parts of the world, similar techniques appear long before the supposed advent of organized civilization. Terraces carved into mountainsides, aqueducts and cisterns built with remarkable precision, and channels designed to withstand flooding and erosion. The similarities across time and space raise the possibility that practical knowledge, once considered unique to certain cultures, may have been part of a broader, older tradition. Perhaps these solutions were passed down from a civilization whose understanding of the natural world exceeded that of its successors, leaving behind techniques that would later be rediscovered or refined. Metallurgy, too, presents an intriguing puzzle. Early metal tools and weapons sometimes display an unexpected level of sophistication, with alloys, tempering methods, and craftsmanship that suggest careful experimentation and technical knowledge. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, required an understanding of chemical reactions and precise control of temperature, knowledge that seems remarkable for the periods in which these artifacts appear. The possibility arises that such expertise was not entirely new, but a continuation, a refinement of skills handed down from an earlier culture whose innovations were absorbed into later civilizations. In this light, the achievements of the Sumerians and their contemporaries appear not as isolated genius, but as part of a chain of human ingenuity stretching back into the unseen past. The mysteries of transportation and architecture also offer compelling examples. In places like Egypt, Central America, and South Asia, we see structures whose construction would challenge modern engineers without cranes, pulleys, or other technological aids. From massive temple stones to enormous statues, the labor and skill required seemed disproportionate to the tools available at the time. How were these feats accomplished? Were they the product of generations of trial and error, or did the builders inherit methods, principles, and understanding from a previous civilization? The question lingers, quietly suggesting that human knowledge has a deeper, more ancient root than the historical record alone can reveal. As we contemplate these examples, a subtle pattern begins to emerge. Human civilization may not have begun from scratch in Sumer or any other single location. Instead, it seems more plausible that early societies drew upon a reservoir of inherited knowledge, refined over generations, preserved in myth, practice, and artifact. This inheritance could account for the sudden sophistication we observe in Sumer and other early civilizations, a sophistication that seems almost preordained rather than spontaneously invented. The echoes of a forgotten race, transmitted across time and space, provide a lens through which these achievements can be understood as part of a larger continuum, a hidden history that quietly underpins the origins of human society. In reflecting on these lost technologies and ancient knowledge, we encounter a profound lesson. History is not merely a record of what we can see and touch, but also a story of continuity, inheritance, and the unseen currents that shape human development. The artifacts, structures, and innovations that survive are not only proof of ingenuity, but also silent witnesses to influences long forgotten. They invite us to consider the possibility that the brilliance of early civilizations was not entirely their own, that they stood on the foundations laid by beings or societies whose names have vanished from memory. In this space between known and unknown, between concrete evidence and whispered possibility, we begin to glimpse the contours of a deeper, richer past, one that invites curiosity, contemplation, and wonder. As we step further into the shadows of prehistory, we encounter the theories that attempt to bridge the unknown, to make sense of the tantalizing evidence suggesting civilizations before Sumer. These theories occupy a delicate space between imagination and scholarly inquiry, between rigorous analysis and speculative possibility. They do not provide definitive answers, yet they offer frameworks through which we can consider the echoes of a forgotten past. By exploring them, we are invited to imagine a world in which human history is not a simple line from primitive to advanced, but a tapestry woven with lost threads, interrupted sequences, and legacies passed down from civilizations now vanished. One of the most compelling perspectives considers the idea of a forgotten race, a people whose knowledge and culture were advanced for their time and whose influence persisted indirectly through the ages. This notion is not merely a fanciful story. It arises from the gaps in the historical record, the sudden emergence of complex urban societies, and the unexplained sophistication of certain artifacts and constructions. Göbekli Tepe, for example, predates Sumer by thousands of years, yet it exhibits advanced planning, symbolic artistry, and a deep awareness of astronomy. Its existence challenges the assumption that human civilization emerged only gradually and independently. Could it be that sites like this preserve the memory, however fragmentary, of a civilization whose achievements were inherited, transformed, and incorporated into the development of later societies? Connected to this idea is the concept of cumulative knowledge, the notion that humanity may have repeatedly inherited wisdom from predecessors whose civilizations rose and fell long before written records. In this view, progress is not purely linear, but accumulative, with ideas, technologies, and methods passing through cycles of creation, loss, and rediscovery. Early humans may have learned from remnants of these forgotten civilizations. Architectural techniques, agricultural practices, celestial observations, and social organization that informed the later rise of Sumer and other early civilizations. This theory invites us to see history as a living continuum, where even what is lost continues to shape the course of human development in subtle, enduring ways. Some researchers have proposed that migration and diffusion may have played a role in transmitting this inherited knowledge. Ancient peoples were not isolated. Trade routes, travel, and exploration could have allowed the movement of ideas and practices across vast distances. The repetition of myths, symbols, and technologies across disparate regions, Egypt, Mesopotamia, South America, and South Asia, may point to such diffusion. For instance, astronomical knowledge appears in cultures separated by oceans and continents, suggesting either an inherited understanding from an older, shared source, or the possibility that these civilizations were influenced by traces of a pre-existing, globally connected culture. In this way, the echoes of a forgotten race may have traveled silently, shaping societies in ways that are only now beginning to be noticed. Another theory explores the idea of cultural memory, in which the experiences of one generation are transmitted not only through artifacts and texts, but also through collective consciousness, ritual, and myth. These memories may preserve knowledge of a civilization that no longer exists in material form. Stories of gods, giants, and ancient teachers, found across multiple continents, could represent a cultural residue of societies that predated Sumer. These legends, while often symbolic, carry structural similarities that hint at a common origin or shared influence. When examined carefully, they offer a glimpse into a world that predates recorded history, a world where knowledge and culture could survive even when physical monuments had crumbled. Some theorists also speculate that climate and cataclysmic events may have contributed to the disappearance of these early civilizations, erasing direct evidence while allowing fragments of their knowledge to survive indirectly. Rising seas, shifting river courses, and geological upheavals could have swallowed cities and settlements, leaving behind scattered monuments, myths, and oral traditions. In this context, Sumer and other early civilizations could be seen as inheritors of a legacy shaped by survival, adaptation, and the preservation of knowledge across generations. The contrast between what was lost and what survived underscores the fragility of memory and the resilience of human ingenuity, highlighting how the echoes of a forgotten race could persist even after the civilization itself vanished. In exploring these theories, it is crucial to balance skepticism with curiosity. The gaps in the historical and archaeological record are not proof of a forgotten race, but they are invitations to consider possibilities that extend beyond conventional narratives. By combining evidence from multiple disciplines, archaeology, anthropology, linguistics, mythology, and astronomy, we begin to see patterns that suggest continuity, inheritance, and influence. These patterns do not resolve the mysteries, but they enrich our understanding, creating a framework through which the emergence of Sumer and other early civilizations can be viewed not as isolated miracles, but as chapters in a longer, more intricate story. One of the most fascinating aspects of this exploration is the way it challenges our perception of human achievement. We often think of early civilizations as isolated instances of ingenuity, arising independently in fertile valleys and river basins. Yet when we consider the possibility of inherited knowledge, a different picture emerges. Human progress may be cumulative, shaped not only by invention, but also by the absorption of wisdom passed down through generations, across regions, and even through civilizations now lost to memory. The brilliance of Sumer, the sophistication of Egypt, and the precision of ancient structures worldwide may all be threads in a tapestry that began long before the first written word. The calm reflection required to entertain these theories also mirrors the process of studying prehistory itself. The evidence is subtle, scattered, and often enigmatic. Archaeologists uncover fragments, sometimes mere hints of structures, symbols, or tools. Myths and oral traditions whisper across centuries, carrying echoes of forgotten achievements. By piecing together these fragments, by observing patterns and inconsistencies, we can begin to imagine the contours of a world that predates the civilizations we know, a world in which knowledge and culture were cultivated, lost, and sometimes partially transmitted to those who followed. Ultimately, these theories of pre-Sumerian origins ask us to consider humanity not as a species that arose suddenly in one valley, but as a lineage that has inherited the wisdom, failures, and achievements of those who came before. They remind us that history is not only the record of what we can see, but also the story of what we cannot, the faint traces of knowledge and influence that persist even when monuments crumble and names are forgotten. In this interplay between certainty and speculation, between the visible and the invisible, we find both mystery and meaning, an invitation to explore, to imagine, and to honor the hidden depths of our collective past. As we linger in this space between theory and evidence, a sense of wonder emerges, a recognition that the story of civilization may be far older and more intricate than the first city suggests. The Sumerians, with all their achievements, may have been not the beginning, but inheritors of a legacy of knowledge, culture, and insight whose origins stretch into the deep shadows of prehistory. By considering these theories, we allow ourselves to see history not as a series of isolated events, but as a continuous, flowing tapestry where the known and unknown, the remembered and the forgotten, converge to shape the human story in ways that are as humbling as they are profound. As we delve deeper into the ancient past, we encounter archaeological anomalies that challenge our conventional understanding of history. These are the discoveries that do not fit neatly into the established timeline, the structures, artifacts, and traces of human activity that seem to appear suddenly, fully formed, and often impossibly advanced for their time. From monumental constructions to intricate tools, these anomalies provide tantalizing hints that the story of human civilization is far more complex than the linear progression typically taught. They invite us to consider the possibility that humanity may have inherited knowledge, techniques, and ideas from a civilization older than Sumer, a civilization whose existence remains largely hidden beneath layers of soil, myth, and time. Some of the most striking examples are found in monumental architecture. Sites like Pumapunku in Bolivia showcase massive stone blocks, some weighing over 100 tons, precisely cut and aligned with interlocking joints that defy conventional explanation for the tools supposedly available at the time. Similarly, the temples of Baalbek in Lebanon, with their enormous megalithic stones, raise questions about the methods used to transport, lift, and place them with such exactitude. These constructions are not isolated incidents. Across the globe, from Egypt's pyramids to the stone circles of Europe, we encounter structures that challenge our assumptions about ancient engineering. The precision and scale suggest an understanding of mathematics, physics, and logistics that may have been inherited from an earlier, now-lost civilization. Beyond monumental architecture, smaller artifacts also hint at extraordinary knowledge. Intricately carved figurines, advanced metallurgy, and objects with precise geometric patterns suggest skills and techniques that appear unexpectedly early in the archaeological record. The Antikythera mechanism, for example, discovered in a Roman shipwreck off the coast of Greece, is an ancient device capable of predicting astronomical events with remarkable accuracy. Its existence implies a level of technical sophistication that historians had not previously attributed to ancient societies. While such artifacts are often dismissed as anomalies, they may, in fact, represent fragments of knowledge passed down from civilizations that preceded recorded history, remnants of a lineage of innovation that survives only in isolated evidence. Submerged structures offer another dimension to these anomalies. Along coastlines in India, Japan, and the Caribbean, researchers have identified underwater ruins suggesting settlements that existed thousands of years ago, long before conventional history would place them. Rising seas and shifting landforms may have swallowed entire cities, leaving behind foundations, walls, and geometric formations that now lie hidden beneath the waves. These discoveries hint at a world in which early human societies may have been far more advanced, organized, and interconnected than we typically imagine. The very act of survival, of rebuilding, relocating, and passing knowledge forward, may have allowed traces of these forgotten civilizations to influence later societies, including Sumer. Astronomical alignments further underscore the anomalies in ancient knowledge. Many ancient structures, from the pyramids of Giza to Stonehenge in England, are oriented with remarkable precision toward celestial events such as solstices, equinoxes, and the rising and setting of specific stars. While the Sumerians themselves were skilled astronomers, capable of predicting lunar and planetary movements, these alignments appear independently in cultures separated by thousands of miles and years. The recurrence of such sophisticated astronomical knowledge raises intriguing questions. Did these civilizations develop these skills independently, or were they inheritors of a shared, older tradition of cosmic observation, passed down from a civilization whose name has been lost to time? Equally compelling are anomalies related to metallurgy and material science. Ancient bronze tools, weapons, and ornaments often display craftsmanship that suggests controlled alloying, temperature management, and understanding of chemical processes. In some cases, the alloys used and the techniques applied seem far ahead of their supposed time, indicating knowledge that may have been inherited rather than entirely invented. This pattern of inherited technological sophistication extends across multiple regions and eras, suggesting the existence of knowledge networks or traditions that predate the historical record we currently possess. The question arises, how much of what we attribute to the ingenuity of early civilizations might actually be the refinement of techniques learned from predecessors long forgotten? Linguistic and symbolic anomalies also provide evidence of hidden histories. Certain symbols, motifs, and early writing systems appear across distant regions without clear connection, suggesting either a shared origin or an ancient diffusion of knowledge. Sumerian cuneiform, for example, emerged suddenly in a complex, fully developed form, rather than gradually evolving from simpler proto-writing. This abrupt emergence mirrors patterns observed in other parts of the world, where writing, architecture, and sophisticated craftsmanship appear with little obvious precedent. These anomalies, while often debated or explained as coincidence, may instead point toward a hidden lineage of knowledge, a cultural inheritance from civilizations predating Sumer. Even the fossil and skeletal record hints at anomalies that challenge conventional timelines. Evidence of advanced tool use, cultural practices, and symbolic behavior in early hominins suggests intelligence, creativity, and social organization far earlier than previously thought. Sites in Africa, Asia, and Europe reveal behaviors that hint at planning, artistry, and cultural transmission among human ancestors, implying that the capacity for civilization may have been incubating long before the emergence of cities. These behaviors, when considered alongside architectural and technological anomalies, suggest a continuity of intelligence and creativity, a thread that could connect Sumer and other early civilizations to a deeper, largely invisible past. As we examine these anomalies, a common theme emerges. Humanity's story is not a straight line from primitive beginnings to advanced societies. Instead, it is a web of innovation, inheritance, and rediscovery, punctuated by gaps, mysteries, and civilizations that may have risen and fallen without leaving a complete record. The Sumerians, remarkable as they were, may have stood upon foundations laid by unknown predecessors, inheriting techniques, knowledge, and cultural practices that shaped their cities, writing, and social structures. The anomalies in the archaeological record are not just puzzles. They are signposts, pointing to a deeper history that is only partially visible, a past that humbles as much as it fascinates. In contemplating these anomalies, we are reminded of the contrast between the known and the unknown, the visible achievements of history and the invisible influences that may lie beneath. They compel us to ask not only how early civilizations accomplished their feats, but also from whom, or from what, they may have inherited the seeds of their ingenuity. Were Sumerian cities built on foundations of knowledge passed down from a vanished civilization? Did early engineers, artisans, and astronomers refine ideas inherited from a race whose existence now survives only in echoes, myths, and unexplained artifacts? The anomalies do not answer these questions definitively, but they keep the possibilities alive, guiding our imagination and curiosity into the quiet spaces of history that remain unexplored. Ultimately, the study of archaeological anomalies is an exercise in both evidence and wonder. It invites us to listen to what is present, the monuments, tools, and artifacts, and to acknowledge what is absent, the gaps and silences where civilizations may have existed and disappeared. By examining these anomalies with care and imagination, we begin to see patterns that suggest continuity, inheritance, and the persistence of knowledge across time. In doing so, we cultivate a sense of humility and curiosity, recognizing that the story of humanity is far richer and more intricate than the timelines and textbooks suggest. The anomalies are reminders that history is not fixed. It is alive with questions, mysteries, and the faint, persistent whispers of civilizations that may have come before. As we continue to explore the hidden layers of human history, we find ourselves in the delicate space where myth, recorded knowledge, and symbolism intersect. It is here, in this subtle overlap between story and evidence, that hints of a forgotten wisdom emerge, an understanding that may have been preserved long before the rise of Sumer, long before written history began to codify human achievement. These traces are often overlooked by conventional scholarship, dismissed as allegory, superstition, or poetic imagination. Yet when approached with quiet attentiveness, they reveal patterns, concepts, and ideas that suggest the presence of a culture or race whose knowledge was profound and whose influence may have shaped the very foundations of human civilization. In Sumerian records, for example, myths are not merely fanciful tales. They are repositories of cultural memory. The Anunnaki, deities who descend from the heavens to guide and teach humanity, are described with roles that suggest the transmission of knowledge and societal organization. They provide instruction in agriculture, architecture, law, and astronomy, fields that would define early civilization. Modern interpretations often read these myths symbolically, Yet the repeated emphasis on instruction and guidance hints at a deeper message. The Sumerians may have recognized that their achievements were built upon knowledge that came from beyond their immediate ancestors. The stories themselves become a bridge, a coded transmission of wisdom whose origin predates the civilization recording it. Symbolism also plays a crucial role in preserving this hidden knowledge. Ancient cultures frequently encoded ideas in visual forms, using art, carvings, and patterns to convey concepts too complex or sacred for spoken or written language alone. Geometric designs, celestial alignments, and recurring motifs appear in sites around the world, from the carvings at Göbekli Tepe to the intricate symbols of the Maya. These symbolic forms often embody principles of mathematics, cosmology, and social organization, suggesting that the creators possessed a sophisticated understanding of both the natural and abstract worlds. When considered together, the recurrence of similar symbols across distant cultures raises the possibility of a shared, older source of wisdom, transmitted across time and geography. Myths themselves can be seen as repositories of this ancient knowledge. Across continents, stories emerge of giants, gods, and ancient teachers who shaped the world before the rise of recorded civilizations. In Mesopotamia, the Anunnaki are described as guides and intermediaries. In Greece, the Titans represent a primordial order preceding human societies. In Mesoamerica, the Quetzalcoatl and other sky beings are credited with imparting critical knowledge to early humans. While these tales differ in names, cultures, and narrative details, they share structural similarities. The presence of beings who possess advanced knowledge, who interact with humans, and who leave a lasting imprint on society. These similarities may point to a memory preserved across generations, a faint echo of civilizations that existed before Sumer and whose wisdom influenced the development of subsequent human cultures. Even written records, when analyzed carefully, contain subtle indications of this inherited wisdom. Cuneiform tablets, while primarily documenting trade, laws, and governance, also encode cosmology, ethics, and philosophy. They hint at patterns of thought and societal organization that may have roots extending beyond the immediate Sumerian context. The sudden emergence of writing itself, with its capacity for abstraction and record-keeping, suggests that the Sumerians may not have invented this system entirely in isolation. Instead, it is possible that writing arose from a tradition of symbolic communication preserved and refined over generations, a legacy of knowledge that stretches further into the shadows of prehistory than conventional accounts typically acknowledge. The role of ritual and ceremony also demonstrates the preservation of forgotten knowledge. Across ancient civilizations, religious practices, sacred spaces, and ceremonial events often encode information about cosmology, natural cycles, and social structure. Temples aligned with celestial bodies, festivals timed with solstices and equinoxes, and rites of passage all suggest a deliberate attempt to embed understanding within cultural practices. These rituals serve as living records, transmitting complex ideas in ways that survive the erosion of time, conquest, and cultural change. Through these practices, knowledge may have been preserved long before written language or monumental architecture emerged, passed from one generation to the next with careful attention to symbolic meaning. Art, too, carries hidden knowledge. Sculptures, reliefs, and pictograms often encode abstract principles and observations about the world, including anatomy, astronomy, and geometry. Patterns that appear in one culture may recur, centuries later and thousands of miles away, in the work of societies that ostensibly had no contact with one another. The repetition of these motifs suggests not mere coincidence, but a continuity of knowledge, a symbolic thread that binds civilizations across space and time. This continuity hints at a forgotten race or culture whose wisdom persisted in encoded form, influencing the evolution of human society long after its creators had vanished. Even oral traditions play a role in preserving hidden wisdom. Stories told by elders, myths recounted around fires, and chants repeated in ritual contexts often carry knowledge that is practical, spiritual, or philosophical. These oral transmissions can encode information about survival, agriculture, astronomy, and social organization, functioning as a living archive. The fact that similar myths and symbols appear across cultures separated by vast distances suggests that these oral traditions may be more than localized inventions. They may be echoes of a wider network of knowledge, a bridge connecting humanity to a pre-Sumerian past. In contemplating these connections, it becomes clear that myth, record, and symbolism are not separate entities, but interwoven channels through which knowledge survives. Each complements the other. Myths preserve narrative and ethical understanding. Records encode practical and administrative knowledge, and symbols provide abstract and technical insights. Together, they form a mosaic of inherited wisdom, a silent testimony to civilizations whose physical traces may have been lost, but whose influence continues to shape human development. This perspective challenges the notion of history as a purely chronological sequence, inviting us to consider instead the layered, complex, and sometimes hidden ways in which knowledge travels through time. By examining myths, records, and symbolism with both curiosity and care, we begin to perceive a subtle pattern. The achievements of early civilizations like Sumer may have been influenced by the legacy of a forgotten race, a civilization that existed before recorded history, whose knowledge was transmitted in fragments across generations. The structures, tools, rituals, and narratives that we observe are not isolated phenomena. They are parts of a continuum, a faint but discernible thread linking the known past to the mysteries that preceded it. In this way, the interplay of myth and material evidence becomes a lens through which we can explore the hidden depths of human history, a bridge connecting us to a world that has long existed in the shadows of memory. As we linger in this quiet contemplation, a profound sense of wonder emerges. Myths, symbols, and records, though often overlooked or dismissed, carry within them the whispers of civilizations long gone. They remind us that knowledge is not always tangible, that the legacy of humanity is encoded not only in stone and clay, but also in stories, art, and ritual. The forgotten wisdom embedded in these forms challenges us to see history not as a linear progression of events, but as a living tapestry, interwoven with memory, influence, and the persistence of human curiosity. Through this lens, we begin to imagine a world where Sumer and other early civilizations were not the absolute beginning, but inheritors of a legacy that stretches far deeper into the past, a past whose echoes continue to resonate in the myths, symbols, and records that have survived to our own time. Language and symbols are among humanity's most enduring tools for preserving knowledge, serving as bridges between generations, cultures, and even eras that may otherwise seem disconnected. Long before the rise of Sumer, humans developed ways to communicate not only immediate needs, but also abstract ideas, patterns, and understanding of the world around them. Symbols, whether etched in stone, painted on pottery, or woven into fabric, have the power to encode information that survives the passage of time, even when spoken words are lost and civilizations vanish. Language, in its earliest forms, becomes a repository of inherited wisdom, carrying echoes of thought, observation, and technique that may have originated in a civilization long forgotten. Consider the origins of writing. Sumerian cuneiform is often celebrated as the first true writing system, yet sudden emergence, fully formed and complex, invites questions about precedent. Did writing arise entirely spontaneously, or was it the culmination of a lineage of symbolic communication passed down from earlier peoples? Across the ancient world, proto-writing appears in various forms. Symbols in Anatolia, markings on bones and clay in Europe and Asia, and carved glyphs in the Americas. While these systems are often dismissed as rudimentary, they suggest a cognitive framework capable of abstraction, record-keeping, and transmission of knowledge. Such abilities imply that humans had long been encoding experience and understanding symbolically, long before the rise of Sumer. preserving wisdom in a form that could endure beyond the lifespan of a single civilization. Symbols themselves are remarkable in their ability to convey multiple layers of meaning. A single motif might represent a natural phenomenon, a social principle, a spiritual idea, or even a technical principle related to construction, agriculture, or astronomy. Ancient cultures used symbols to encode knowledge that was practical and sacred at once, ensuring its transmission without relying on verbal explanation alone. The alignment of megalithic stones to celestial events, the recurring motifs in carved stele, and the intricate geometric patterns in pottery all suggest an understanding of the world that extends beyond the immediate environment. These symbols form a kind of silent language, one that speaks across generations and continents, hinting at a shared or inherited wisdom that may have originated in an earlier civilization now lost to history. Language, too, carries the subtle imprint of forgotten knowledge. Early Sumerian texts, Egyptian hieroglyphs, and Mayan glyphs are more than tools of communication. They are records of thought, observation, and cultural memory. They encode laws, myths, trade, astronomy, and ritual, preserving insights that could otherwise have been lost. When studied closely, they reveal patterns of abstraction, analogy, and symbolism that suggest a continuity of intellectual tradition, one that may trace back to societies existing before Sumer. Words themselves become vessels of inherited meaning, transmitting ideas about the natural world, social organization, and cosmology across generations, even in the absence of a fully surviving civilization. The universality of certain symbols across disparate cultures is particularly striking. Spirals, circles, zigzags, and concentric motifs appear in sites from Europe to the Americas, from Africa to Asia, often with similar connotations of life cycles, cosmic order, or spiritual pathways. These recurring forms suggest that humans may have preserved a shared body of knowledge through symbolic representation, adapting it to local context while retaining essential patterns. The repetition of these symbols, even in isolated or disconnected regions, hints at the possibility that they were inherited from civilization or race whose memory lingers across the ages. In this way, symbols act as cultural echoes, preserving information that might otherwise have vanished beneath the sweep of time and change. Early languages and symbols also demonstrate a capacity for encoding highly sophisticated knowledge. Astronomical observations, measurements of time, mathematical principles, and societal regulations could all be recorded through writing and symbolic systems. By examining the precision and structure of these records, we glimpse an awareness that suggests learning from prior generations. These systems do not appear randomly. They are carefully constructed to ensure accuracy, consistency, and longevity. Such sophistication implies the existence of teaching, transmission, and perhaps even codified methods that were inherited from civilizations older than the first recorded histories of Sumer, revealing a continuum of understanding that links the distant past with early urban society. Beyond practical knowledge, symbols and language preserve philosophical and spiritual insight. Many ancient texts, carvings, and inscriptions contain encoded reflections on existence, morality, and the natural order. In Sumerian hymns and myths, the actions of deities and heroes illustrate principles of balance, justice, and human responsibility, reflecting observations and cultural wisdom that may have been inherited from earlier peoples. Similarly, symbols in Egypt, Mesoamerica, and Asia often convey dual meanings: practical and sacred, scientific and spiritual. By intertwining the material and conceptual, these systems ensure that knowledge endures, providing guidance not only in physical survival, but also in understanding humanity's place in the cosmos. Oral tradition, closely linked with language and symbols, plays an equally vital role in preserving forgotten knowledge. Stories, chants, and rituals serve as living archives, carrying lessons about agriculture, social organization, astronomy, and ethics. Oral transmission allows knowledge to survive even when physical records are lost, and it often incorporates mnemonic devices, repetition, and symbolic storytelling to ensure accuracy across generations. In many cases, these oral traditions align with symbolic and written records, suggesting a multi-layered system of preservation in which different modes of communication reinforce and complement one another. The convergence of oral, symbolic, and written forms creates a durable framework for transmitting knowledge across millennia. When considered together, language and symbols reveal a profound truth. Humanity's history may be far older and more intricate than the first civilization suggests. The sophistication of early Sumerian writing, the universality of symbolic motifs, and the preservation of knowledge through oral and ritual traditions all hint at a lineage of learning that predates recorded history. These systems serve as conduits through which the wisdom of a forgotten race may have survived, subtly influencing the development of civilizations that followed. In essence, language and symbols are not merely tools. They are vessels, carrying the faint but persistent imprint of human understanding across time. In reflecting on the role of language and symbols, we begin to appreciate the depth and resilience of human knowledge. Even in the absence of physical monuments, written records, or surviving cities, the ideas, patterns, and insights of earlier peoples persist. They endure in the shapes of stones, the curves of glyphs, the rhythms of spoken tradition, and the codified structures of early writing. Through these channels, knowledge flows across generations, linking the present with a past that remains largely hidden yet profoundly influential. It is through this subtle, silent inheritance that the possibility of a forgotten race, whose wisdom shaped early civilizations like Sumer, becomes both plausible and compelling. Ultimately, language and symbols remind us that history is not merely what can be counted, measured, or cataloged. History is also what can be remembered, encoded, and transmitted in forms that transcend time, place, and the fragility of material survival. By studying the intricate interplay of language, symbols, and memory, we begin to perceive a hidden layer of human experience, one that connects the achievements of Sumer with a deeper, earlier past. In this quiet contemplation, we are invited to see civilization not as a sudden emergence, but as a continuum woven from inherited knowledge, observation, and imagination, a legacy that endures in the words, symbols, and stories that humanity has passed from one generation to the next. The idea that traces of an older civilization might still lie hidden beneath our feet becomes easier to imagine when we consider how effortlessly time erases the past. Most of what humanity has ever built, its shelters, its tools, its markers of meaning, was created from materials that surrender quickly to weather, water, and silence. Even the grandest ruins that survive today are only the lucky ones, the fragments of structures that happen to be made of stone, situated in dry landscapes, or buried rapidly enough to be preserved. If we widen our view to the span of tens of thousands of years, the pieces that remain form only the thinnest sliver of all that once existed. It becomes clear that the absence of evidence is not as solid a barrier as it may seem. Archaeology relies heavily on the durability of materials and the conditions in which they are left behind. Yet early humans, and any possible advanced culture before the known civilizations, likely built with wood, reeds, mud, textiles, leather, and organic paints. These are the materials that almost never survive beyond a few centuries unless sealed in a rare, protective environment. Even the strongest wooden beams decay in less than a millennium. Textiles vanish even faster. Entire settlements made from such materials could exist, thrive, decline, and disappear without leaving a trace recognizable to the modern eye. The earth itself would swallow them, layering soil, roots, and dust over the frail remnants until nothing remained but the faintest disturbance in the ground. We often imagine that if there were a forgotten race or an earlier civilization, we would have found some undeniable artifact by now. A tool too advanced for its time, a building too large to ignore, a metal too purified to have been produced accidentally. But this expectation assumes that all societies build in the same monumental way. Many cultures throughout history have left almost nothing behind, despite being relatively recent. Nomadic groups, for example, contributed enormous cultural influence, yet left minimal archaeological markers. Their lives were mobile, their tools recyclable, their structures temporary. If entire groups within the last few thousand years can vanish from the landscape so cleanly, what happens when we imagine their disappearance stretched across 10 times that span? The Earth is not a still canvas that preserves everything laid upon it. It is a restless, shifting sphere of wind, water, fire, and slow-moving stone. Rivers wander across their floodplains, burying one generation's homes beneath mud while carving away the remnants of another. Forests grow and rot, their roots breaking apart old foundations. Winds grind stone into dust, burying artifacts beneath dunes or scattering them across barren plains. Earthquakes topple structures instantly. Volcanic eruptions bury cities. Landslides erase entire valleys in moments. Over tens of thousands of years, landscapes transform so completely that even modern geologists struggle to reconstruct their earlier forms. Sea level rise is one of the most powerful erasers of the past. During the last ice age, enormous areas of land now submerged were dry coastal plains, prime locations for human settlement. Rivers flowed through what are now continental shelves, and shorelines extended far beyond their present positions. When the ice melted and the oceans rose, these vast landscapes were swallowed by the sea. If societies built along those coastlines, as human societies always have, their remains are now underwater, buried beneath sediment, inaccessible to traditional archaeology. Underwater archaeology is still in its infancy, and the majority of the world's submerged shells have never been explored systematically. It is entirely possible that significant evidence lies beneath layers of silt, waiting for tools we do not yet possess. Even discoveries on land face challenges. Erosion can erase carvings, topple walls, and scatter tools. The freeze-thaw cycle can fragment even the hardest stone. In many climates, buried artifacts degrade rapidly due to moisture, microbes, and chemical reactions. A structure exposed to the open air for a few centuries might become unrecognizable, while one buried too deeply might never be exposed again unless discovered by chance or through deliberate excavation. And because most archaeological work occurs in limited areas, often where construction projects demand it, large swaths of land remain untouched. What lies beneath may never be reached simply because no one has reason to dig there. Time also introduces another kind of erasure, the burial of older layers beneath newer ones. Human settlements often build upon previous ones, piling layers of occupation like sedimentary strata of culture. Ancient cities such as Troy, Jericho, and Catalhook are known precisely because they were rebuilt in place again and again, leaving tall mounds that draw archaeological attention. But if an early settlement was abandoned and never reoccupied, its remains could lie beneath meters of soil without any clear surface indicators to suggest it existed at all. The ruins of older societies may be hidden beneath forests, deserts, farmland, or modern cities, silently waiting beneath the layers of later life. Another limitation is our reliance on recognizable patterns. Archaeologists know how to identify pottery shards, hearths, stone foundations, and burial practices because they reflect familiar cultural behaviors. But what if a forgotten race used techniques or materials that do not fit the patterns we know? A structure made entirely of woven materials might leave no trace. A symbolic system carved in soft wood or painted with natural pigments might be erased completely. Even stone objects can be misunderstood. A deliberately shaped stone can be mistaken for a natural feature, while a natural formation can be mistaken for something shaped by human hands. The risk of misinterpretation is higher the further back we look, and the stranger a culture's practices might have been. Earth's tectonic activity adds another layer of complexity. Entire regions have been uplifted, submerged, folded, and fractured. Mountain ranges rise and erode. Coastlines form and vanish. Over 100,000 years, land can move dramatically, carrying artifacts with it or crushing them beneath tremendous pressure. Fossils survive this process only rarely, and even then, only under very specific conditions. If any early advanced culture existed long before Sumer, it is possible that only the most resilient fragments of their existence survived, and that even those fragments might lie in places where no one expects to find them. Against this backdrop of natural erasure, the surviving archaeological record can be seen not as a complete archive, but as a sparse mosaic. We fill the gaps with inference, logic, and caution, but the gaps are immense. Civilizations that left behind thousands of buildings, millions of artifacts, and abundant written records can still be misunderstood by modern researchers. What, then, might be the fate of a culture that used fewer durable materials, lived in regions prone to destruction, or flourished during a time when sea levels and climates were dramatically different? Understanding this fragility invites humility. It reminds us that the story we tell about human origins is pieced together from what survived the accidents of time, not necessarily from what was most common or most significant. The Earth is vast enough, and its history long enough, to hold entire chapters of human or human-like activity that we have not yet uncovered, and may never uncover fully. This does not confirm the existence of a forgotten race or an ancient inheritance, but it keeps the possibility alive in a quiet and grounded way. What remains, then, is not certainty but space, a space for curiosity, for patience, and for the recognition that the world we see today is layered atop countless worlds that came before it. In that space, the idea of lost histories feels less like fantasy and more like an open question, waiting gently in the soil and the sea for someone to notice. Even as we survey the carefully cataloged relics of known history, there remain objects and places that refuse to fit neatly into the stories we tell. These anomalies, often subtle and understated, are fragments that challenge the neat progression from prehistory to civilization. Maps drawn centuries ago depict coastlines and islands that no longer exist, suggesting knowledge of lands long submerged beneath rising seas. Tools and artifacts are discovered in strata that seem far older than their technology should allow, as if the hands that shaped them belonged to people whose understanding of the world preceded the accepted timeline. These out-of-place discoveries do not scream their significance. Instead, they whisper it, drawing attention to the possibility of histories we have not yet imagined. Some of the most intriguing anomalies appear in the form of structures that defy expectations. Carved stones or foundations emerge in regions where conventional archaeology suggests human presence was minimal or entirely absent. Occasionally, inscriptions are found in locations where linguistic or cultural influence should not yet have reached. These subtle irregularities invite questions that do not have immediate answers, demanding that we expand our perspective beyond linear progression. The quiet persistence of these anomalies encourages a form of curiosity that is patient and reflective rather than sensational, perfectly suited to the long, meditative journey through human history. Natural processes often obscure the context of these discoveries, making them even more enigmatic. Floods, earthquakes, and volcanic activity can shift or bury objects far from their original sites. Over centuries, erosion and sedimentation can scatter artifacts across vast areas, leaving isolated remnants that seem impossible to connect. A simple stone tool or fragment of metal may appear in a layer of earth that, according to conventional timelines, should be devoid of human presence. Rather than dismissing these finds, they are better understood as pieces of a larger puzzle, hints of paths and patterns that have otherwise been erased by the slow, quiet hand of time. Even the human mind struggles to reconcile these anomalies with established knowledge. Our expectations, shaped by textbooks and mainstream archaeology, often filter what we notice and what we accept. When faced with an object or a map that seems impossible, it is tempting to attribute it to error, forgery, or coincidence. Yet these anomalies persist, reappearing in different regions and contexts, suggesting a subtle consistency that cannot be ignored. They occupy a threshold between the known and the unknown, where curiosity thrives not through certainty, but through careful observation and reflection. In addition to physical anomalies, certain cultural artifacts hint at forgotten knowledge. Ancient symbols, astronomical diagrams, and architectural alignments occasionally suggest an understanding of mathematics, geography, or celestial movement that seems surprisingly advanced for their time. These examples rarely fit comfortably into the accepted historical timeline. When viewed together, they create a pattern that hints at the possibility of knowledge transmission from an earlier, perhaps lost, culture. The pattern is not overt, but it is persistent, a quiet echo of ingenuity that the ages have not completely silenced. The beauty of these anomalies lies in their subtlety. They do not shout, they do not demand immediate explanation. They are gentle provocations, coaxing the observer to consider broader possibilities. They remind us that history is rarely a straight line and that our narrative is incomplete. For anyone willing to look closely, anomalies become invitations rather than puzzles. Opportunities to expand imagination and to entertain the notion that humanity may have inherited knowledge, skills, or inspiration from a previous age that left almost no trace. These mysterious remnants also challenge the idea that early humans were simple or uniformly primitive. They suggest that intelligence, creativity, and technical skill may have existed in forms or contexts that our current archaeological frameworks struggle to recognize. Perhaps some achievements were lost to floods, fires, or soil erosion. Perhaps knowledge was passed along orally or symbolically, leaving few tangible traces. These anomalies, small and scattered as they may be, become the threads of a larger, hidden tapestry, a tapestry that invites us to see the past not just as a timeline of events, but as a layered landscape of potential, memory, and subtle inheritance. In contemplating these mysteries, the mind is drawn naturally towards Sumer and the dawn of recorded civilization. Sumer, with its tablets, kings' lists, and myths, may represent the first page that survived, yet it cannot capture the entire book. The anomaly suggests that the lines connecting us to the past may extend further, reaching back into forgotten landscapes, drowned coasts, and vanished societies. They are silent witnesses to what was, and they remind us that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Returning to Sumer, the cradle of written civilization, one cannot help but notice the subtle hints embedded in its records, suggesting that even this remarkable society may not have sprung entirely from nothing. The clay tablets, etched with meticulous care, speak of kings, cities, and gods, but beneath these familiar narratives there are whispers of something older, an inheritance, a quiet acknowledgement that knowledge, skills, and cultural insight may have arrived from a source long before the first city walls were raised. In Sumerian mythology, these stories emerge not as isolated tales, but as recurring motifs. Divine teachers, semi-human sages, and flood survivors who arrive mysteriously, bringing gifts of writing, farming, and law. These accounts, preserved for millennia, hint that the Sumerians themselves may have recognized a history that stretched beyond their own beginnings. The list of Sumerian kings is particularly fascinating. Many of the earliest rulers are described as having reigned for tens of thousands of years, a detail that modern historians often treat as symbolic exaggeration. Yet, read with patience and a willingness to entertain possibilities, these extraordinary reigns suggest an awareness of times that preceded the known human experience. Perhaps these figures are mythologized memories of an older generation, beings or peoples whose influence shaped the very foundations of Sumerian society. The contrast between these almost fantastical lifespans and the historical reality that follows is striking, inviting a reflection on how ancient cultures encoded memory, reverence, and awe into their records. The Sumerians may have been signaling, through myth, that the first stones they laid were not entirely their own, but part of a continuum that began long before their city-states rose along the Euphrates. Sumerian mythology is replete with teachers who bridge the gap between divine and human, introducing knowledge that transforms society. Figures such as the Apkallu, often depicted as wise, half-human, half-fish beings, are said to have emerged from the waters carrying gifts of wisdom, writing, and agriculture. These beings were not mere deities to the Sumerians. They were revered as instructors, intermediaries who prepared humanity for the age of kings and cities. In the stories, they arrive, teach, and then depart, leaving behind the cultural scaffolding upon which Sumerian society could flourish. In this narrative, one can glimpse a subtle acknowledgement of an earlier influence, a civilization or knowledge that existed before Sumer recorded its first stories. The contrast here is striking. Sumer itself is the shining beacon of the known past, yet constantly gestures towards something more ancient, something quietly erased from time. Flood narratives, so central to Sumerian culture, carry a similar resonance. The myth of a great deluge, in which a single survivor preserves life and wisdom for future generations, is mirrored across continents. From the Epic of Gilgamesh to stories in India, the Americas, and Australia. Within these tales, one can sense the imprint of memory, an understanding that societies may rise, fall, and vanish, leaving fragments that are sometimes absorbed by later cultures. The Sumerians' flood myths may not only recount environmental catastrophe, they may also encode a recognition of inherited knowledge, of civilization itself, as a gift from a past that has otherwise been forgotten. The calm repetition of this theme across millennia and continents suggests that memory persists, even when physical traces vanish. Writing itself, that signature achievement of Sumer, provides a tangible reflection of this inheritance. Cuneiform was not created in a vacuum. It was a system that evolved, refined over generations, likely influenced by earlier forms of record-keeping and symbolic communication. Some scholars have speculated that proto-writing existed in scattered communities long before Sumer codified it on clay tablets. The idea that Sumerians were the first to invent writing is complicated by the possibility that they inherited conceptual frameworks, storytelling techniques, or symbolic knowledge from those who came before. Every wedge-shaped mark on clay carries not only information, but also the echo of accumulated thought, suggesting that civilization is less a sudden creation and more a delicate continuation of earlier human, and perhaps pre-human, endeavors. Agriculture and urban planning, central to Sumerian development, also hint at older knowledge. The irrigation canals, city layouts, and sophisticated farming techniques imply not just ingenuity, but inherited experience. In the meticulous ordering of fields and watercourses, one can imagine the subtle transmission of practical wisdom, methods tested over generations, perhaps even before written records existed. The calm reflection on such continuity transforms our perception of Sumer. Instead of a civilization emerging spontaneously, it becomes a chapter in a longer story, a story that may begin with nameless predecessors whose hands guided the shaping of land, tools, and social structures. Even Sumerian religion, with its pantheon of gods associated with specific skills, domains, and natural forces, may reflect acknowledgement of older civilizations. The careful categorization of divine roles, from the sky god and to the water god Enki, may not merely reflect theological invention, but a cultural memory of people who understood the world in ways that Sumer later codified into story and ritual. By encoding these lessons as divine intervention, Sumerians created a narrative that both explained their world and preserved fragments of knowledge from the past. The contrast between myth and recorded history, divine and mortal, known and forgotten, becomes a recurring motif, inviting contemplation of what lies beyond the written record. When one considers all of these threads together, the kings who lived impossibly long, the teachers who arrived mysteriously, the flood survivors who carried wisdom, the innovations in writing, farming, and urban design, a picture emerges that is both subtle and compelling. Sumer is not simply the first civilization. It is a living repository of echoes, It is the point where memory crystallized into record, where inherited knowledge became tangible, and where the presence of what came before can still be sensed. The quiet weight of these possibilities encourages reflection rather than certainty, allowing the imagination to wander through times and societies that may have preceded those recorded on tablets. Ultimately, Sumer becomes more than a historical milestone. It becomes a threshold, a liminal space where what is known meets what is suspected, and where the stories of older, vanished peoples may still whisper through the clay and stone. The civilization stands as both evidence and enigma. Evidence of human achievement. Enigma in its hints that the story of humanity's rise is far longer, far more intricate than the tablets alone can convey. In this calm reflection, one can see Sumer not as a beginning, but as a point of inheritance, a civilization that acknowledges, in myth, practice, and record, the presence of those who came before and whose stories are only faintly remembered. As we move beyond the myths and achievements of Sumer, the landscape of speculation widens, and the subtle traces of a forgotten world begin to take shape in the mind. What if the earliest known civilizations were not isolated sparks of ingenuity, but rather the continuation of a far older tradition, one that had risen, flourished, and quietly disappeared long before our earliest written records? This thought invites a sense of humility, for it reminds us that human history, as we understand it, is framed largely by survival. The survival of objects, writings, and monuments that happen to endure the passage of millennia. Countless generations may have existed before Sumer, leaving only whispers behind, a weathered stone, a faintly etched symbol, or a buried city long lost to riverbeds, sands, and tides. In imagining these lost worlds, we step into a space between curiosity and reverence, where the unknown is not frightening, but quietly profound. Consider the physical remnants of human activity that have survived in unexpected places. In deserts, hidden beneath shifting sands, archaeologists occasionally uncover structures, tools, and carvings that seem older than the surrounding settlements. Beneath the waves, sunken cities hint at civilizations swallowed by rising seas long before the recorded history of the Fertile Crescent. In the frozen north, ice preserves objects and organic materials that would have otherwise decayed, giving us rare glimpses into lifestyles that seem almost alien in their sophistication. These fragments, scattered across continents and climates, point to a pattern. Human or human-like. Ingenuity is not confined to the era of Sumer, but is part of a far broader story whose full scope we may never fully reconstruct. What makes these discoveries particularly compelling is their ambiguity. Unlike a single, well-preserved site, many of these traces resist definitive interpretation. They offer tantalizing suggestions without conclusions. A perfectly aligned stone structure might hint at astronomical knowledge, yet we cannot always know the intentions of its builders. An artifact might reveal technical skill far beyond what we assume for its time, yet we cannot be certain if it is the result of independent innovation or inherited knowledge. In this sense, the remnants of a forgotten race act as gentle provocations, quietly nudging our imagination while remaining elusive, encouraging the mind to explore possibilities without demanding certainty. This ambiguity mirrors the philosophical questions embedded within Sumerian culture itself. The myths of divine teachers, semi-mortal sages, and long-lived kings suggest that the Sumerians, too, grappled with the idea of inheritance from the past. Perhaps they recognized that human civilization is rarely born in isolation. Knowledge, practical, technological, spiritual, is cumulative, building silently over generations. By encoding this understanding in myth and ritual, Sumerians preserved not only their own accomplishments, but also the shadowy presence of those who came before. In this light, their stories of flood survivors and gifted teachers may not be mere allegory, but encoded acknowledgement that even the brilliance of their cities rests upon foundations they did not fully understand or remember. The concept of inherited knowledge also resonates with patterns observed in human cognition and culture. Across millennia, certain discoveries appear repeatedly, often in disconnected regions: the wheel, metalworking, irrigation, astronomical observation. These recurring innovations may reflect convergent evolution of intelligence, but they also raise the possibility of cultural echoes transmitted across generations and geography. Could a forgotten civilization have seeded these innovations, leaving faint signals that reemerge as societies reach similar stages of complexity? In considering this, we must expand our sense of history beyond what is tangible, embracing both the visible and the invisible, the documented and the implied. Geography itself plays a subtle role in this story. Human settlement tends to cluster around fertile valleys, river systems, and coastal regions. Yet these landscapes are also vulnerable to environmental change. Flooding, tectonic activity, and rising seas have repeatedly altered coastlines and riverbeds, swallowing entire settlements and reshaping the geography that once supported thriving civilizations. Much of what may have existed in these regions is now inaccessible, submerged beneath the oceans or buried beneath meters of sediment. The knowledge of earlier societies may be encoded in the remnants of their tools, the alignments of submerged structures, or the faint disturbances in the earth, waiting for patient exploration to reveal them. Even time itself is both an eraser and a storyteller. Centuries compress, layers accumulate, and organic materials decay, leaving only traces. Yet the traces that survive, stone tools, inscriptions, ceramics, carry echoes of thought, intent, and skill. Each fragment, however small, is a testament to continuity. When examined carefully, these remnants invite us to imagine lives lived in distant landscapes, lives that may have influenced the trajectory of later civilizations, including Sumer. In this sense, archaeology is not merely the study of objects, but the study of connections across time. The faint transmission of ideas, the persistence of ingenuity, and the silent testimony of forgotten hands. The speculative lens also allows us to revisit anomalies in ways that traditional frameworks might overlook. Out-of-place artifacts, unexplained symbols, and sudden technological leaps take on new meaning when considered as evidence of a longer chain of human, or pre-human, history. These anomalies are not proof, but they are hints, quiet signals that suggest the past is far more layered than our current records indicate. Approaching these mysteries with patience and open curiosity allows us to consider a narrative in which civilization, intelligence, and cultural sophistication are not confined to a few known origins, but are scattered, hidden, and occasionally glimpsed across deep time. Ultimately, contemplating the possibility of a forgotten race encourages a mindset of humility and wonder. It reminds us that what survives is not the totality of human history, but only the portion that withstood the slow, quiet erosion of time. The gaps in our knowledge are not failures. They're spaces of potential, inviting imagination and careful inquiry. In these spaces, we can explore scenarios where Sumer and other early civilizations are part of a continuum, inheriting lessons, techniques, and perhaps even philosophies from societies that have vanished almost entirely from the physical record. This approach does not demand certainty. It invites reflection, allowing the mind to linger in the quiet interplay between what is known and what is merely suggested. In this reflective space, one begins to see the world of ancient humanity as a layered tapestry. Sumer is a luminous thread, easily visible, yet interwoven with strands of unknown origin. The civilizations, peoples, and knowledge that preceded it may never be fully reconstructed, yet their presence is felt in patterns, anomalies, and subtle echoes throughout the archaeological and mythological record. By acknowledging these layers, we honor the vast, unrecorded histories that make human achievement possible, and we open ourselves to a vision of the past that is as mysterious as it is profound. A past in which the story of civilization stretches far beyond the first city walls into a landscape of quiet, enduring enigma. As we approach the threshold between recorded history and speculation, the mind naturally pauses, lingering in the quiet space where evidence fades and imagination begins to fill the gaps. The story of Sumer, impressive though it is, now appears not as the origin of civilization, but as a luminous waypoint along a much longer journey. We are reminded that the achievements of any society are rarely born in isolation. Just as a river is shaped by the tributaries that feed it, human knowledge, culture, and innovation flow from countless, often unseen sources. There may have been civilizations before Sumer, civilizations whose names are lost, whose structures have been swallowed by earth and water, yet whose influence quietly persists in the innovations and ideas we recognize in the earliest cities. In this reflective space, one begins to notice the patterns that emerge when civilizations are viewed as part of a continuum. Tools, architectural techniques, agricultural methods, and even symbolic systems appear in dispersed and unexpected places, hinting at a transmission of knowledge that transcends geography and chronology. These patterns are subtle, almost imperceptible, yet persistent, like the soft hum of a distant instrument beneath a quiet melody. They encourage us to consider that humanity's earliest civilizations may have absorbed fragments of knowledge from older cultures, adapting and expanding them in ways that eventually coalesced into the societies we now celebrate in history books. The concept of inheritance also reframes our understanding of progress. Rather than imagining civilization as a sudden spark arising from primitive beginnings, we see a story that unfolds in layers, with each generation building upon the achievements of those who came before. Sumer's advances in writing, law, astronomy, and urban planning may not be purely original, but they stand as milestones in a continuum, a record of human ingenuity layered atop earlier, quieter innovations. In this way, the idea of a forgotten race does not diminish Sumer. Rather, it enriches it, situating its accomplishments within a broader, more profound narrative that spans both the known and the imagined past. The quiet mysteries of pre-Sumerian history also invite reflection on the fragility of memory and material evidence. Cities are buried, texts are lost, and objects decay over time, leaving only tantalizing traces behind. Yet even these traces carry meaning, hinting at skills, knowledge, and cultures that were once vibrant. Observing these remnants requires patience, a willingness to entertain questions without immediate answers. It is a gentle practice, suited to calm contemplation, in which curiosity is nurtured more than certainty, and wonder is valued more than definitive proof. In this state, history feels alive, expansive, and mysterious, stretching backward in the mists of time, waiting for the mind to explore its hidden layers. The possibility of inherited knowledge also reshapes how we interpret myths and stories. Tales of gods, teachers, flood survivors, and extraordinary kings may not be simple fantasy, but cultural echoes, codified in narrative to preserve memory when other forms of record were impossible. They are subtle bridges between the visible and invisible, the tangible and the lost. Just as the Sumerians encoded wisdom in clay tablets, so too did earlier civilizations, perhaps now entirely vanished, encode knowledge in ways we are only beginning to perceive. These myths and artifacts become threads connecting humanity across ages, reminding us that the past is not linear, but layered, interwoven, and occasionally hidden beneath the surface. As we trace these threads, the boundary between fact and speculation softens, creating a space where questions are more meaningful than answers. What would it mean if humanity had truly inherited civilization from a forgotten race? How would our understanding of ingenuity, history, and cultural identity shift if we accepted that Sumer was not the dawn, but a continuation? These are not questions meant to be resolved quickly, nor do they require certainty to be valuable. They exist as invitations, allowing the mind to wander through the vast landscape of human potential and memory, to consider what was what might have been and what echoes still linger in the world around us. This space of contemplation naturally prepares us for reflection on the enduring impact of these possibilities. As we transition from the speculative history of pre-Sumerian civilizations to the lessons we draw from them, we carry with us an expanded vision of humanity, a vision that acknowledges the fragility and resilience of knowledge, the impermanence of societies, and the quiet persistence of innovation. In this meditative state, the story of civilization becomes not a series of discrete events, but a flowing continuum, rich with mystery, continuity, and the faint traces of those who came before, whose influence quietly shapes the foundations of what we now call history. As we arrive at the close of this journey through time, myth, and speculation, there's a quiet sense of wonder that settles over the story of humanity. The tale we have followed, from the rise of Sumer to the possibility of an older, forgotten race, does not end with certainty, but with reflection. Perhaps that is as it should be. The allure of history lies not only in what we know, but in the spaces where knowledge fades and imagination begins to wander. The possibility that civilization was inherited rather than invented reminds us of the vastness of time, the fragility of memory, and the intricate web of influences that shape the world we inhabit today. Each city, each innovation, and each story is a whisper of a longer narrative, one that stretches back beyond the horizon of our records and forward into the quiet moments of contemplation. In considering a forgotten race, we are invited to adopt a broader, humbler perspective on human achievement. The monuments of Sumer, the carefully etched clay tablets, and the astonishing records of kings and gods were not created in isolation. They may stand upon the foundations of cultures whose names we no longer know, whose cities have vanished without trace, and whose stories survive only in subtle echoes. This realization does not diminish Sumerian accomplishments. Rather, it elevates them, placing them within a continuum that spans generations, regions, and perhaps even species. Civilization, in this light, is less a sudden spark than a flowing river, fed by unseen streams, shaping the landscape of human knowledge through quiet persistence over time. Reflection on these possibilities also encourages us to reconsider the nature of knowledge itself. What we recognize as innovation, writing, urban planning, agriculture, astronomy, may often be inheritance, refined and adapted over centuries. Ideas travel, transform, and endure, sometimes leaving only faint traces behind. When we study the past, we are not only uncovering facts, but tracing the continuity of human thought and creativity. Each artifact, each myth, each fragment of evidence is part of a dialogue across time, a conversation that stretches beyond memory and history into the realm of imagination. In this way, the echoes of the forgotten race are not mere speculation. They are an invitation to witness the delicate persistence of human ingenuity across millennia. The calm, reflective pace of this exploration mirrors the way we might approach the night itself. Just as the world grows quieter and shadows lengthen, our contemplation of the past allows for a gentle, immersive engagement with mystery. There is no rush, no imperative to reach definitive answers. Instead, there's the satisfaction of tracing connections, of observing patterns, and of lingering in the tension between what is known and what remains hidden. The possibility of inheritance, of civilizations that preceded Sumer, transforms history from a linear sequence of events into a vast landscape of layered stories, each offering insight, curiosity, and a touch of wonder. In the end, this exploration is not only about civilizations long gone, but also about how we perceive our place in the continuum of time. If we imagine ourselves as inheritors of knowledge that stretches far beyond recorded history, we are reminded of the responsibility and privilege of carrying it forward. The civilizations that came before, whether recorded in clay, buried beneath earth, or preserved in myth, offer lessons not only in skill and ingenuity, but in the resilience of culture, the fragility of memory, and the quiet, patient work of sustaining knowledge. They remind us that human achievement is always part of a larger story, one that connects past, present, and future in a tapestry of creativity, adaptation, and discovery. Finally, contemplating the existence of a forgotten race encourages a sense of humility and awe. The past is vast, layered, and often inaccessible. Its influence endures in ways both tangible and intangible. Sumer stands as a beacon, a civilization we can observe, study, and admire, but it also stands as a gateway, pointing us toward the mysteries that preceded it. The clay tablets, the myths, the architectural marvels, all carry traces of a deeper history, inviting us to imagine, to question, and to dream. In this reflective state, history becomes more than a sequence of events. It becomes a living conversation, a meditative journey that stretches across time, connecting us to the echoes of those who came before and inspiring us to consider the unseen currents that continue to shape human civilization. As the mind slowly drifts toward closure, there's a lingering sense of serenity and curiosity. The story we have explored is one of beginnings, inheritances, and quiet mysteries, offering no definitive conclusion but endless invitation. Humanity may not have sprung fully formed from the fertile banks of Sumer alone. Perhaps we are the inheritors of knowledge, skill, and culture that stretches back into shadows older than we can imagine. And perhaps that is the beauty of it, the recognition that history is alive, layered, and never fully known, that the mysteries of the past are not merely to be solved, but to be felt, pondered, and carried gently in our imagination. In this quiet reflection, the journey ends not with answers, but with wonder, leaving the mind at ease, yet subtly alert, ready to dream of forgotten worlds and the invisible hands that shaped the civilization we inherit today.